Good evening. One of the last times I was on this BIS stage, I was in rehearsals for the Founders Day program. And I remember as part of the Hindi play Shakuntala, I was playing the role of a fisherman who had discovered a ring in the belly of the fish. And in my enthusiasm to impress Karla Singh, who was directing the show, I tripped over the harmonium right about there, fell down, broke my forearm, and I think it's just karmic that I'm back here today orating as an orthopedic surgeon, someone who mends broken bones. Uh, you know, the exposure of most of our audience here, I won't say to doctors, say to the world of medicine, is primarily through, I would say, television shows. Maybe House, a Grey's Anatomy, Scrubs, the ER, Chicago Hope. We love all these shows. But what you probably, Scrubs being my personal favorite because I think it's hilarious and I think it's most accurate. Grey's Anatomy, what many of you all might not know, is not in fact named after the gorgeous Meredith Grey's Anatomy. It is in fact named after this gentleman, Mr. Henry Grey, who has written the Bible of Human Anatomy by the same name, which of course nobody knows, and which every medical student has to read in the first year of med school. And despite the fact that we see a lot of drama on these shows and a lot of excitement, it's really a far cry from reality, where in very trying and tragic and stressful situations, you most certainly will not have the background score of Coldplay or Snow Patrol to enhance the entire experience. So, when a patient is actually wheeled into an OR, it is you need to be on top of your game. It's really important. You're not just fooling around. There's a lot of planning and preparation before a patient is actually wheeled into an operation theater, much contrary to what you would like to believe. The planning and the dedication and passion required to pursue this field of medicine often makes doctors rather, blinkered. People think we're very boring, we're very one-dimensional, we have no other interests in life, and rightly so. As a father of two young boys, I feel these days that the conversation with other parents very easily veers towards, like Alisha said, creativity and the abundance or lack of it. And I would like to stress here because I strongly believe that the medicine is not one of those fields which is dull and boring and lacks all creativity. There's a high level of artistry, a high level of skill which is required. And more than anything else, we require to improvise on the job. We require to be creative, and we have to think out of the box in order to make it work because no two people are built the same way. Do we have a lot of Sherlock Holmes fans over here in the audience? Your fans. I don't mean Benedict Cumberbatch. I mean the character developed by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Well, did you know that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was a practicing physician when he wrote that series? And did you know that Dr. Khalid Hosseini was a practicing physician in California before he found fame and success as the author of The Kite Runner? The list of doctors turned authors is tremendous, with greats like Somerset Maugham, Michael Crichton, Robin Cook, John Keats, so many of them being just a few of the big names. Other than that, a lot of you all might be fans of the sitcom Friends. But did you know that quirky Phoebe, Lisa Kudrow, is actually a medical graduate? Or did you know that Jay Sean, who's currently on a Billboard Top 100, is actually a physician? Or did you know, I'm sure you all know that Palash Sen of Euphoria is a trained doctor, but these people have been able to pursue both their hobbies and the academic studies simultaneously, and they managed to nurture both these skills and eventually choose the one which gave them the greatest high. Closer to home, my wife, who's here in the audience, is a practicing anesthetist who also happens to be a classical concert pianist. And I think that's really creditable because she has managed to marry her love for science and yet pursue her hobby. And in today's times, where it's so easy to convert your hobbies into your profession, I would strongly urge you all to nurture your hobbies along with your academic careers. So let me quote Dr. Khalid Hosseini at this point in time. He had said that it may be unfair, but what happens sometimes in the course of a few days or sometimes in a single day can alter your entire lifetime. And I believe that as doctors, we are exposed to several such days. As an orthopedic surgeon, I strive to have a patient who is free of pain. That pain might be of an arthritic hip or an arthritic knee or a broken bone. But really, pain is such a broad term, and do we really understand what pain is? I'd like you to just shut your eyes for a moment and imagine a life without pain. Wouldn't that just be amazing? We'd all be superheroes. So, this is the story about Kareem. a real life superhero. I first met Kareem when he was 21 years old, and he suffered from a very unusual disorder, which was called congenital insensitivity to pain with anhidrosis, a very big word. To cut it down and put it very plainly, he had absolutely no sense of pain. Anhidrosis is a term which means he did not sweat at all. So, in fact, his body temperature would get so high that he needed to be wiped down with a wet cloth just to maintain his body temperature. Kareem had been neglected for quite some time because people could not figure out what was wrong with him, and he did finally present to an orthopedic surgeon at the age of 11, at which point in time his knees had already gotten rather deformed. He was unable to walk well. He had developed this painless limp, which was making life difficult. He was even finding it difficult to get to school. And people had treated him with a case of tuberculosis. He had causes of anti-TB drugs, antibiotics, and when everything failed, they very broadly classified him as having neuropathic joints, which is a term given to people who with maybe leprosy or diabetes, whose joints essentially are insensate. It was much later, almost 6 to 8 months later, after a battery of investigations, that it was finally concluded that he did suffer from this very rare genetic disorder. Now, over the course of the next few years, between 13 and 17, he had multiple minor, trivial injuries, some of them more major, very often went unnoticed because he never reported it to anybody. But when he was 17, he sustained a fracture of his tibia. And that went unnoticed for a brief period until his knee became grossly inflamed, swollen. It was black and ugly. There was a huge ulcer at the lower thigh, which was foul smelling. And he came to the hospital literally knocking at death's door. I don't want to alarm you with images, but I think it's important to hear his story. That's how he looked at that point in time, with entirely damaged limbs, entirely damaged joints. And at this point in time, the only way to bring him back from that death's door was actually to perform an above knee amputation. So here at 17, he had lost one limb. He had a totally deformed other limb, which did not allow him to walk. It was at this point in time that I actually questioned this boy's existence on this planet. Here's a child who wants to just be a normal kid. He wants to go to school. He wants to have that ability to play with his friends, and he's not able to do those things. And my philosophical inner struggle was always assuaged when I saw his eternally smiling, optimistic face in the OPD, which always belied that internal self-destruction. He had a bifid tongue, a snake-like bifid tongue, which had come down because he had bitten down on it so many times. He had poked his eyes so many times, he was near blind. And despite that, his resilience and optimism was so amazing. Just imagine a near blind boy sitting in front of you, deformed limbs, but unfailingly positive in his demeanor. So what is CPA? This is a very rare genetic condition, 1 in 25,000. If you extrapolate that to our Indian population, it really isn't so rare. You should see someone like this walking around everywhere. But you don't. And the reason for that is that most of them die before their second birthday. And the fact that this boy was alive at 21 is what made him a medical marvel. The fact that he lived till 21 made treating him so difficult, because while you and I don't need to be taught to not poke our eye or pluck out our teeth, he needed to be taught. He needed to be told that if he started to bleed, that it's time to actually stop, reach out for help, and ask someone to help him. Kareem was 1 in a million, not just medically, he was 1 in a million spiritually, because despite all that he had been through, he was ever smiling, eternally optimistic, and he wanted his story to be told. And when I actually photographed him for a series of medical journals and publications, he smiled instinctively into the camera, very hopeful that the world would see him, little realizing that I would actually have to crop out his face when it came to publication. There are a lot of things I learned through Kareem. I have learned endurance. I have learned how to face adversity with a smiling face. I have learned how to respect our own body, respect the 5 senses that we have been gifted and we take so much for granted, and the value of self-preservation and the importance of pain. He will be smiling down at us today, Kareem, because his story is still being told. And while this story reflects the tragedy in medicine, there are, of course, numerous situations where you find humor in the darkest of situations. So how many of y'all are fans of this show, Narcos on Netflix? Maybe not too many. Well, for those of you who aren't followers, it's based on the life of the Colombian drug lord Pablo Escobar in the 1970s. And one of the ingenious ways of smuggling drugs or any illicit substance across borders and to get through security checks was body packing. What you're seeing on that X-ray is actually people who've swallowed packets of cocaine, and they're sitting in their small intestine. And my first hand experience with this deadly practice actually happened way back in the first year of my residency, when on an otherwise very dull night duty, this gorgeous African lady was brought into the casualty, and the only thing which marred her impeccable appearance was the fact that she was held by these two burly Malayali policemen. And for the life of us, we could not understand what is going on over here, you know. So being enthusiastic first year residents, we had learned to like listen into what the medical officer was interviewing her about, and we soon realized that she was a smuggler, and she was smuggling in diamonds. So we can see where they were. They were not on her neck, they were not hanging on her ear, they were not on her ring finger. So where were these diamonds? She had swallowed them, 20 diamonds in all. At this point in time, my general surgical colleague was really excited. He was like, you know what, we're going to have emergency surgery, and we're not going to take out an appendix or a gallbladder. We're going to like take out 20 diamonds, and it's going to be great, you know. Maybe I'll smuggle out one of them for myself, and I'll be rich forever and ever. And X-rays done, investigations completed. We now have proof of this illicit crime that had taken place, and he called his boss, you know, very enthusiastically with the lowdown on the most interesting case probably of that whole week. And we literally saw that sparkle go from his eye as he nodded acquiescence to his boss's instructions. And the next thing we knew, he had been given the dubious honor of administering her an enema and a laxative, and actually sifting through her feces to extract each diamond. So he did a very good job, mind you. He retrieved all of them, and not before one of them cut a little hole in her intestine, and she did require surgery, but 72 hours later. And although he didn't manage to smuggle out any diamonds that night, and we continued our residency rather poor, I think that entire experience left us a lot richer. And you might ask me how, and I would say because we learned firsthand the tragedy which befalls people who are pushed into this deadly underworld of smuggling. We learned surgical restraint, which is something which is so important when not to operate. We learned that you should be able to laugh at yourself, laugh in the presence of trying situations, and more than anything else, that sometimes you just have to go through a shitty situation to learn all of this. There's somebody who said that, you know, there's little success where there's little laughter, and I think today there's little success where there's, if you're not technologically savvy, you're not going to be successful. We have all sorts of things that are fingertips now. We have MRIs, we have CT scans, we have robotic surgeries, we're doing computer assisted surgery. We have WhatsApp, we have Facebook. Every doctor will have a website, a Facebook page. Accessibility and availability is everything. And with this technologically advanced world, the latest imaging techniques literally at our fingertips, it's revolutionized medicine. I actually have patients WhatsApping me the MRI reports or taking a photograph of their mangled extremity and sending it to me saying, Doc, what can we do? Even before they come into the clinic. Investigations are an enormous boon. They aid us unimaginably, but they are not a substitute for a thorough medical examination. The science and the ritual of examining a patient, the art of pinning down that culprit disease, the what did he say? The pleasure in the conversation with the patient and his family as they give you intimate details of their life, the fact that you're able to reassure them and say everything is okay. These are the aspects of medicine I feel we are tending to forget as doctors these days, and which are very important. In my practice, I make it a point that when my patients, I see them on the round, that I talk to them, I cajole them, I motivate them, I give them the necessary scientific input required for them to realize how their body is going to heal. I believe that we as a society have been lulled into this ignorant stupor, believing that medical reports are a substitute for acuity of the human mind, and that these black and white images that we see, they have some hidden messages which are actually a substitute for a thorough physical examination. And we forget the power of a reassuring touch, which can be so cathartic to the patient, absolutely essential for the surgeon, and conveying a very important message, which was very beautifully described by a fellow doctor, Dr. Abraham Verghese. And I quote, that I will always, always be there I will see you through this. I will never abandon you, and I will be with you through the end. Thank you.
Questions for Dr. Lad?
I tried to keep this very non-orthopedic because I thought everyone would be really bored if I spoke on knee replacements. So,
Questions? Yeah.
What is the hardest aspect of being a doctor?
oh my God, I could give you a list. So many things. It depends, I think, on at what phase of life you are in. When you are a student, it's hard to put in the hours of studying. It's hard initially to see patients who are struggling. You've not been exposed to that when you go, and I've worked in Indian hospitals where you see patients in really the worst of situations. And so it's difficult to come to terms with what you're dealing with. That is as a student. Later on, dealing with patients, like Alicia said very appropriately, that it's communication is extremely important. I think we lack all communication skills. I have seen that in my colleagues, I have seen that in people who have encountered, and I think it's extremely important. I would say communication is the single most important and difficult thing for a doctor to get around. And if you can master that, I think the rest is everyone knows the science. It's about dealing with the human aspect of it, which is difficult. Yes.
So, since you're a doctor, you might, some cases might have a good ending and some might have a bad. So, the ones that have a bad, where you're not able to save the person, how did you get past that? And how did you go back trying to help people with the problem after?
That's a very good question. There have been situations where we've not been able to save patients. I'll give you two situations. One is where you know the patient is not going to fare well because they're so elderly, so old, and so frail when they come to you in the first place. So, in that sort of situation, you have counseled the relatives even before you actually started their treatment that your outcome may not be great. I'm talking from a surgical point of view. And they understand the risks involved and what it entails, and so it's not so difficult to get past it. It's never easy to lose somebody, it's always difficult. And then there are those situations where it's unexpected. You lose someone young who's been in an accident or who's been in a just had some like a sudden onset of something which has taken their life, and that is a very tricky situation because again, it could be something which has happened at the spot. If it's an accident case where a car has run over them, there's, you do whatever you can to save them. But sometimes it happens at your hands, and that can be a tricky situation to get over. And I do know people who have struggled with getting back to surgery after they have lost people on the operating table. It does happen. There's a lot of counseling and a lot of period of grief, and you actually do introspect and wonder whether you're doing the right thing. Are you in the right field? Are you cut out for it or not? But I think you have to just get up and move on and get on with it because there are other lives to save. Thank you.
No more questions. Thank you so much.